Every so often, we find ourselves haunted by media. A certain story, a song, a series of images you saw late at night when you were young and the world was half dreamy. I'm haunted by a game called The Path. It's a simple game. It consists of little more than walking through the forest. There's only one objective: go to grandmother's house, and one rule: stay on the path. But you end up at grandmother's house no matter what you do, and you have to break that one rule to win. The game is a take on Little Red Riding Hood, if that wasn't already clear. So, of course, there are wolves. But they're not chasing you. They're waiting for you to come to them. The entire experience of the path is surreal and ominous. It doesn't employ jump scares or have enemies. You simply walk in the woods, and the off-kilter, grimy visuals, dynamic sounds, and general aesthetic keep you in a state of unease. This game feels like a waking nightmare. It's seldom outright scary, but it never really feels comfortable. Yet, that's not what makes this game so haunting for me. The path denies the player a typical narrative. Everything is subtext and abstract imagery. It first gained notoriety in the early 2010s because it was so damn dense and hard to understand. I'm a little late here, offering my explanation a decade later, but this game won't let me forget it, and it's Halloween anyway, so we have to get a little creepy. Like I said before, this game deals heavily in the abstract and implied. If we want to make some sense of it, we need to first establish a general framework. I interpret this game as one big allegory. Nothing is actually concretely happening. Every wolf is a metaphor. So here's our roadmap to approaching each of them. First, each of the Red Sisters is representative of a stage of life. Robin is early childhood, Scarlet is young adulthood, and the rest of the girls fill the space in between. Second, their wolves are less personal demons and more situations and dangers specifically inclined towards the ages they represent. Now, the third facet of my framework is a controversial one. There's a tendency for people to read the path through an abysmally dark and dramatic lens, in which it's assumed everything is the most messed up scenario one could possibly read. Instead of squeezing the shock value out of this game like a moldy old gym towel, I want to take a more nuanced approach. None of the girls die. Instead, I'm going to read their wolves as losses of innocence, events which sober them to the reality of the world. They're traumatizing events, but again, these are generalized scenarios that many people live through, and so it follows the girls must survive. So let's give our framework a try before we dive into each of the girls individually. What does it mean if we stay on the path? Well, it's the same outcome for every girl, or, in our framework, stage of life. We avoid our wolf and retain our innocence. However, this results in the game declaring that we've failed. In a sense, we've lived a sheltered life, ignorant to reality. The girl we chose will remain home in the start screen. We didn't grow or mature. Life lessons can be brutal, but the path argues that this sort of suffering can be necessary. Now that we've had a bit of a warm-up, we can try using our framework on the first girl, Robin. Robin is a child through and through, young and carefree. All she wants to do is play, hopping through the woods with reckless abandon, picking flowers, and delighting upon each treasure within the thicket. She brings this same joy to her encounter with the werewolf. She can't even recognize the danger a wild beast poses. This is her innocence. She wants to play with something that's clearly dangerous, a snarling beast creeping around a cemetery. As a result, she's injured. The grandmother's house she wakes up in front of after encountering her wolf contains a cradle, a birthday party, and a grave. Right before her encounter, Robin herself tells us that she can't imagine death. What comes after is the realization of her own mortality. She can be harmed, hurt, she can bleed and die. Her early childhood ends with an understanding of her own frailty. It's straightforward, but that's what it should be. A child of Robin's age is only just starting to understand the world. Rose comes next, slightly older, but a child all the same. As we traverse the woods with her, we come to understand that she's rather abstract and spacey. The world to her is one big poem. Everything falls wonderfully into place to create a giant, cohesive whole. Rose is vaguely spiritual in this way. The world is one that is designed, everything is fated, and in that she sees beauty. Her wolf is similarly hazy. It's also literally hazy. It's less a concrete event, instead it seems almost mystical. I'd wager that this is exactly how Rose saw what was happening. She believed herself to be in the midst of a magical experience, something that was destined and calling to her. What was actually going on was a girl recklessly voyaging out into an unfamiliar lake in the middle of a storm. Rose's view of the world is lovely, but it's not real. Everything doesn't happen for a reason, and things don't always turn out okay. She had to lose this dreamy vision of the world and face the fact that reality is random, sometimes cruel, and often dangerous. Outgrowing childhood, Rose found herself facing concrete consequences of her absent-minded actions, and her perception of the world is violently shaken because of it. Ginger is next, occupying the space between childhood and teenage years, and her wolf greatly reflects this. Ginger herself is a free-spirited tomboy. She enjoys rowdy play, masculine toys, and spying on people. Rebellious isn't quite the right word to describe Ginger, it's more that she enjoys getting into mischief. She doesn't want to be pretty and soft like Rose or a responsible caretaker like her older sister Scarlet. She's still a child who wants to have fun, and she's not ready to let go of her carefree, adventurous youth. At first blush, Ginger's wolf seems to take the form of another girl, a playmate donning red. It's not until we enter her grandmother's house that we get a clear sense of what Ginger has really encountered. Red overtakes our surrounding like never before, covering every wall and accenting every fixture. The path we take has us hiding, crawling under a bed among beloved toys. At every turn, twiny hair obstructs our path, and eventually, barbed wire grounds us in a room lined with bloody mattresses. The first image that flashes before our eyes is Ginger with her knees clenched inward. The imagery here is quite clear. Ginger has hit puberty, and one of the main facets that comes with it for many, menstruation. The first time you get your period can be confusing and unreal. Everything changes very quickly, and suddenly you have a new problem to deal with once a month. Ginger doesn't want to step into this part of her life. She rejects femininity, and menstruation has often been mythologized as a quintessential pillar of womanhood. Her inability to halt her body's progression into a new stage of life feels to her like she's being forced into a role she hates. The very feminine girl in red is emblematic of the archetype she wants to avoid, but feels she now is inextricably linked to. It's also possible to read a homosexual narrative into Ginger's wolf encounter. With first menstruation as the signal of sexual maturity, it often coincides with the development of romantic interests. Ginger's encounter with her wolf can be read as a discovery of sapphic attraction, and the alienation and feelings of incongruity and isolation that can follow. This could also be read as her loss of innocence, realizing that her desires will mark her as different and potentially create difficulty in her life. Themes of puberty give us a good idea of what stage of life the next daughter is in. Ruby is just older than Ginger, putting her around the middle of her high school years, something that plays a major role in her story. Feelings of social isolation, misery, and mortality are at the core of this chapter. Ruby's design alone tells us a lot of what we need to know. She's got a classic goth look and a leg brace. Her personality plays further into this. Her comments are consistently melancholy and imply a sense of hopelessness towards the future. Ruby often comments on the beauty of rot and decay, even going so far as to imply that she wants to harm herself and that she won't live to an old age. Ruby's wolf encounter is similarly morbid, beginning with a man dragging around a body rolled up in a carpet. It's clear that this person is dangerous, and yet Ruby sits with him and accepts a cigarette. What we're seeing here is Ruby falling in with a bad crowd. She feels a lack of control in her life, symbolized in her grandmother's house by a violently swinging cage. This feeling is no doubt due in part to her disability, but it likely has roots within the wild emotions and changes that can come with adolescence. She compensates for this in a way that appeals to her dark aesthetics, but also leads to unnecessary risk-taking. The ruin we see within her house isn't a product of her attitude. It's a consequence of surrounding herself with dangerous people and acting recklessly. A car crash is an apt metaphor. Ruby disregards her own well-being, leading to a downward spiral that will inevitably lead to pain and regret. One's social life is carried on to the next chapter as well, albeit in a different way, and by someone who seems to prosper socially. Carmen's path is one of the more uncomfortable in the game. Most of the content warning blurbs at the beginning of this video are for this section, so here's a timestamp to skip to if you'd like to opt out of the unpleasantness. Carmen has a large focus on finding love. At the same time, she is very aware of her own beauty and the effect she has on others, men in particular. She finds her wolf in a lumberjack working in the forest. I've often seen this wolf interpreted as Carmen being raped, but I have to disagree with this. I think what we're seeing here is a traumatic first sexual experience, but not a violent one. The lumberjack is not aggressive. He takes no interest in Carmen until she actively courts his attention. The moaning we hear in her grandmother's house is likely from Carmen herself. Sex is what she was after, but it wasn't something she was ready for. This experience coming too soon is paired with her realization that this man doesn't have any interest in her beyond what she is physically offering him. He doesn't love her. This destroys Carmen's preconceived notions about sex and relationships and harshly wakes her up to the adult world. Love doesn't function in reality as it does in fairy tales or romance novels. Sex and love don't equate, and you can share your body with someone and still be rejected as a person. As age has increased, each loss of innocence faced by the sisters has become more and more abstract. Scarlet completes this transition. She is a full adult, responsible and somewhat of a mother hen towards her younger sisters. She's straight-laced and values order, often expressing her desire to tidy things up and scoffing at things she deems silly or childish. Scarlet is also rather artistic, holding a tendency to wax poetic and a deep appreciation for music. This is why she finds her wolf at the abandoned stage. It's yet another encounter that doesn't read as all that outwardly creepy. Scarlet's house is then bleak and barren rather than chaotic and scary. Furniture is covered in white sheets, and the floor is often stacked with books and albums. What Scarlet has feared is slow and creeping, a terror that she only realizes long after it has enveloped her. As the oldest sibling, she bore more responsibility than any of the others. often having to look after them alongside or in the place of their mother. Scarlet has been forced to make sacrifices for the well-being of others. Bit by bit, she lost her individuality and interests in the service of them. Scarlet dreamed of a future in the arts, but the curtain has already fallen here. The burden of responsibility to her family has taken their place. It's something she can't easily escape. The sense of duty and love binds like no other. Now we've established what each of our girls represent, but what are we ultimately supposed to take away from the path? It would seem to be a narrative that implies that terrible experiences breed wisdom, and this is true to an extent. The thesis each of the girls has conveyed is one wherein success is measured by growth from pain. However, there's still a piece that is missing, and it can be found in the epilogue. This time we play as the girl in white, a kindly being who has always led the sisters away from danger. Unlike the sisters, she has no wolf, and no internal monologue. When she reaches the grandmother's house, she goes through each of the girls' final rooms before reaching the grandmother herself. We see her wake up, and the game ends, finally bringing us to a shot of all the sisters returning home. When we pair the girl in white's journey with the rest, we come to our final conclusion on what this game wants to impart. There is wisdom to be gained from suffering. Growth is the silver lining on the ways we lose our innocence over time. However, we do not necessarily have to suffer to become wise. Humans can learn from each other's experiences. They can be cautious through a privy lens to the horrors of the world. It's hard to avoid our wolves. They come in many forms and are often seducing, playing on our faults. However, circumventing them is not impossible, and neither of these two roads is truly a failure so long as we survive and move forward. In the end, we choose between the path of pins and the path of needles. We can learn of the terrors inherent to the human experience no matter what. The only way to fail is to stay on the path, to lead a life of naivety and innocence, to ignore the forest and experience altogether, neither safely navigating nor recklessly rushing in. Thank you so much for watching this video. If I sounded a little odd, it's because the universe decided to play a trick on me and get me sick. Nevertheless, I'm glad to finally share this video with you. I really am haunted by this game, and in a way, I hope you will be too. There's so much to unpack and analyze, and that really calls to me. If you liked this video, you can subscribe to our channel, follow us on Twitter at DigiDreamClub, or join the DDC Discord, which is linked below. Thanks again for watching, and happy Halloween!